How's it going, Peng Pirates crew? It's your boy Adrian back with another video. So today I wanted to go over just how to beat Zoro, going over another like beat the meta, but this time an updated version, and also I'm going to be kind of talking about every color specifically instead of just generally because, I feel like it's very useful to just go over like what cards are important in your matchups, how can you like combat these Zoro players, and I'm going to be doing one for Kinemon very soon, but like these types of videos take a really long time and midterms were coming up this week, so it was really tough for me to get this out. But I managed to get this out just before online regionals, so make sure to watch this just to get yourself ready for those Zoro matchups. So of course, we're just going to start off with what the leader skill does. Zoro's is super simple. When he has a Dawn under him, during your turn, you're just going to give all of your characters plus 1000 power. I wanted to like re-go over this because we're kind of in a new context for it. Before, like, this was really good for your rush characters and like just setting up a board where you had like these 2-cost 4Ks and you could just kind of swing out. Now it's a lot stronger because we have like so many 1-cost support cards, and also we got new search cards for Zoro, and it just makes him so strong because he's able to like keep cycling his cards and put these things on the board that have like 2000 or 3000 power. And then just like keep pumping them up. So it's kind of in a new context in this situation, and it just lets him swing out like way faster and way more often than other leaders would, and it's a huge problem right now. So we're gonna get into all of these points in depth, but just like a quick overview is Zoro is super strong right now in this meta because there's just new 1-cost character support that he got, just like this whole 1-cost archetype that is just really, really good for comboing Zoro with his cards. Of course, his leader skill is amazing for comboing with these like low attack characters because he's able to pump them up to 5k and then just keep swinging for cards out of your opponent's hand, or they're just going to take life very quickly. And then also, kind of new removal options have been opened up for him between a couple of cards like Vista. Gordon is a lot better now because you can search it and it has all of the 1-cost synergy cards, right? And then also in this set, they have an amazing endgame finisher in 9-cost Whitebeard. Shanks was like kind of filling that role where, it was like a big beat stick, but it didn't have like the huge impact that Whitebeard does. And then also there's just going to be less 8-drop Kid in the format because you have all of these removal cards, and because of the introduction of black, a lot of these green decks are not running as many 8-cost Kid, and that's going to make it a lot easier for you to take games from green players. And of course, like I said before, we're going to go into depth for all of those points a little bit later, but in general, I wanted to go over some basic strategies against these Zoro players that you can use to kind of win your games a little bit easier. So the number one thing that I see people do all of the time is they refill Zoro's hand way, way too fast. So what will end up happening is, because the Zoro player is like swinging out, you might swing life a lot of the time and kind of try and outpace them, but what you're really doing is you're refilling their hand with a bunch of cards. And then you're also resting your characters, which might not be the best idea, right? Because a Zoro that's controlling the board, like if the Zoro player is getting it so that you have to swing at his board and you're the one playing catch up against like all of his 1-cost and like 3-cost cards, you are going to be put in such a bad spot where the Zoro player is just going to keep cycling through their low-cost cards. You're going to have to keep attacking into it, and you're the one that has to catch up to the Zoro player. So what I recommend is, if there's things to swing at the board as like just a basic kind of rule, if there are things to swing at the board, swing at them. And, because you don't want to be swinging at life when he has like these 2,000 or 3,000 attack characters on board. I've seen people leave them up. You are just leaving him up more attackers for the oncoming turns. Get rid of his board first, and then you could start worrying about poking him for life. If you're swinging like 1 or 2 life each turn, or like attempting to, all you are doing is giving that Zoro player more cards and more aggression. The second thing I am not seeing enough people do is preparing for the Whitebeard turn. So I know I just said don't refill their hand too fast, right? But if you know and you have the board to do it, if you know their only play is going to be like the 9-cost Whitebeard, or you have like a feeling they might have that in hand, it might be a good idea to just like, if they don't necessarily have like a board to clear, like try and go for that extra life before they play the Whitebeard, because I've been in a lot of situations where, you know, I'm also just like trying to clear board every turn, and that's exactly the trap they kind of want you to get in, so that as soon as the 9 cost comes out, they're pumped up to 7k, you really can't attack face into them, and then they just have this like 9 cost 10k staring at you that is just going to blow up a lot of your cheap blockers. And that's a very scary situation to deal with, because then they could just rebuild their board right after. So if you're in like a dire situation, or you're in the position to kind of swing out at their face before the 9 cost comes out, that might be a very valuable thing to do, so that you could like potentially end the game the turn after they play the Whitebeard. And what you don't want to happen is like they play multiple Whitebeards like turn after turn. That is exactly how you lose the late game to this deck. And then also, just a little bit of another rule is I usually don't counter out of attacks against Zoro on my characters, like especially if they're swinging like 2k above it. Like for example, if you have an Okiku and they're swinging 7k with something, I usually won't counter out. The only situations where I will counter out of a character is if it's something like a Boa Hancock or an Okiku, and they have to rest an extra character to get rid of it. So then, for example, like if they have to rest like another Dodon or like another Vista, and they have to allocate more Dawn to swing at the Okiku, and I know that's going to be their last swing in the turn, yeah, sure, I'll counter out. But usually like you want to save those like 1k and 2k counters for your life instead of your characters, because you know they are going to expend resources to kind of keep this board state. But red doesn't have a lot of card advantage outside of like Dodon and Nami, and because they're so low cost, or so like low attack, it's very easy to get rid of their board most of the time. So you don't really have to worry about keeping up like a really steady board, and it's like very deck dependent too. But I'm gonna be going over like what cards will kind of like swing the game in your favor in that case. And then the next 2 points kind of go hand in hand. You always want to control the board against Zoro, like because everything is so like low cost, Zoro players are going to struggle to take the board from you in most cases. So that's where you have to kind of excel. Like you could be losing in terms of life, but make sure you're not losing in terms of board state. And then also prioritize those 1 costs. I've seen this from so many people. They have the choice of either attacking like a Nami or attacking a Curly Dodon or like a Vista, and they attack the thing with like the bigger attack, right? They attack the 3k Curly Dodon, or they attack like the 3k Vista when there's like a Nami rested or like a Sunny Kun rested. And you always kind of want to prioritize those 1 costs, because it takes less Dawn for them to pump up the 1 costs. And I know that seems backwards, like, you know, Nami is a 2k, like she needs more attack, but then for 1 Dawn he could that Nami could be pumped up with like a Magra or a Makino. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're getting caught out like that. And you know, the Curly Dodons and stuff, they should be the last thing that you attack. You should always be prioritizing like the Makino if it's rested, and the 1 cost, since they could be easily pumped up, right? But yeah, you kind of want to get into this cycle where you're going into the end game against these Zoro players, and you're almost like controlling their hand size with like, oh, I'm only going to swing you like once, and then I'm going to use the rest of my swings like for your board, and you're going to be at like 2 or 3 cards each turn. Like you kind of want to get into that state, because you know, if they don't play anything, then that's like a detriment for their turns, especially in the late game. And if they do play anything, that's less cards in their hand that you have to worry about. So you want to get them into that state where they're at like a 2 or 3 card hand in the late game. So lately we've been kind of just talking about general strategies, but now I really want to go in depth into like what cards I'm talking about, what do they do in terms of like the Zoro player. So right now I'm going to be going over like all of the Zoro cards that you need to look out for. And then in the next coming like slides, I guess, I'm going to be talking about like, if you play this certain color, these are the cards that you should look out for and that matter in this matchup. But of course, I've been talking about this like all video. Zoro got this amazing 1 cost support in, you know, Makino, Magra, and Dodon. Makino is one of the best cards in the game right now, in my opinion. She is a 1 cost 2k. Activate main, you can rest this character, and then up to 1 of your red characters with a cost of 1 is going to gain plus 3000 power during this turn. Now, this doesn't seem too OP, right? But you have to think about it in terms of the context of the game. You are playing Makino and resting her to give pretty much 3 Dawn up to like one of your Namis or your Sunnies. And that's going to pump Nami up to 5k, which makes her already ready to go with an attack. She's probably going to be pumped up to 6k with Zoro leader. And then, you know, in the case of like Sunny-kun that could get pumped up, he's going to get pumped up to 6k and then 7k with Zoro leader. So all of the sudden, like for just 1 Dawn, these 1-cost characters are getting so much power out of this 1 card. And then on top of that, she's resting herself. So what that does is that brings attention away from the actual attackers like the Sunny-kun and the Nami, and it brings attention to Makino that has to be swung into. So if you don't have like the board established, if you only have like 1 or 2 characters while Zoro swings at you with like 3 or 4 plus Makino, then all of a sudden like it's very hard to distinguish what to swing at, because, you know, do you want to swing at the Makino while it's, you know, kind of vulnerable, because you could swing at the 1 costs on the board, but, you know, if you don't address the Makino, it's just gonna be used again eventually. So it's really hard to distinguish in those situations what to swing at, and Makino just makes the game a little bit more complicated when you're facing against the red players. And then of course, like a very similar card to that is going to be Magra. He's only going to be a 1k counter. He's also 1 cost, but this time with 2k attack. And then on play, it's the same effect. Give up to one of your red character cards with a cost of 1 plus 3000 during this turn. I think Zoro players usually only run like 2 or 3 of this card. I have not seen anyone like fully max it out. But again, like this is also a card that could really come in clutch, because, you know, you could be like calculating how much Dawn they could swing at you with and stuff like that, but you might not be accounting for like these Magras in hand that could just pump up something by 3000. So it's really hard. And then also on top of that, these 2 cards are really good when you read Curly de Dawn, which is a 2 cost 3k, which is pretty good stats for Zoro to play around with, and she has 1k counter. And then on play, you're going to look at the top 5 cards of your deck, reveal 1 red character card with a cost of 1 or less, and then add it to your hand, then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. And this is absolutely disgusting, because it kind of recontextualizes a lot of the cards in the game, because, you know, this is really good, and obviously for like searching out your Makinos, your Magras, your Sunny-kuns, but this could search out Nami, and really we haven't seen like this combo with any other deck where like you're searching for another searcher, and then those searchers have like bodies that you could then attack with, right? Because then you could use Curly de Dawn, search for a Nami searches for something else. Now you have 2 bodies on the board, and you have basically given up no cards for it, which is really good in red, because your main weakness was card advantage. But with characters like de Dawn and Nami, and being able to like search each other, especially, now we're talking about like just getting free bodies pretty much, and with like no hand punishment, right? Because before it was like the only card they had was the Nami to search something out, and that was the only thing you really had to worry about in terms of searchers. Every other card, once they were off the board, like they would just go even. These cards do not go even, they go plus. So those cards are great, but also Zoro players have access to just better removal nowadays. So they run like the 1 cost Gordon now, 1 cost 2k, activate main. You could bottom deck him and then give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 3k during the turn. This is really good into like putting things in jet pistol range. You're gonna put you know, things that are 9k and below into jet pistol range, and then also just for like swinging into like an 8-drop kid. And this was a really good card in OP1, but now it's even better because you could search it out with like Curly de Dawn. You could pump it up with all the other 1-cost cards, and then also you could still use his attack after, I mean, you could still use his effect after you've attacked with him. And that makes him such a threat, because he could swing at you for potentially like 5k or something like that, and then he could get bottom decked to minus 3k one of your cards. So it's just, he's a very high priority target. If you know if you have the choice to like swing at something, you want him off of the field immediately if you can deal with it. And then of course, red players get access to Vista, which is an amazing card, one of the best in the format. 3-drop 3k with 1k counter, and then on play, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 3000 power or less. This is amazing for getting rid of those chump blockers. You know, the killers are now gone on play. all of the 1 cost and 2 cost blockers are just going to die on play, which is really busted. In OP1, red players did have this effect, but it was attached to a Robin, which did not really stick on board that much. Like, you had to wait for the when attacking effect. With Vista, like, you could just play this, pop something, and it just kind of recontextualizes how you play blockers in the early game, right? Because playing a blocker in the early game means you're taking like some sort of risk for it to just get Vista'd. And then of course you have Nico Robin and Whitebeard still are big threats. Like, they both have the when attacking tag, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a power of 3,000 or less. But it's a lot better on Whitebeard 9 cost because he's not going to go anywhere. Nothing is going to remove him unless you're playing against black and they already have like a Kuzan out. So it's just like very rare that he will ever leave the field. And his effect is a lot more relevant since he's going to be swinging for like 12k at least, 13k with Zoro leader skill, and then he's going to be popping like a chump blocker. So it's actually really difficult for a lot of decks to deal with this card. So I wanted to also just go really in depth in like this huge endgame board, or like this huge endgame monster that is Edward Newgate. So on play, he's going to give the Zoro leader plus 2k power, and this 2k power happens on your turn as well. So it's going to pump the leader up to 7k that he's going to be able to swing with. And then on the crackback turns, he could use the when attacking effect to pop 3,000 power or less characters. This is why I say that if you have the means to do it and you have a feeling like they might have 9 cost in hand, it might be more valuable to actually just try and get as much life out of them as possible, so that you don't even have to deal with this Edward Newgate, or like it feels uncomfortable for them to try and play the Newgate, because it's going to eat up their entire turn. Like, this is a really good card, but it's kind of like 10 cost Kaido. It eats up their entire turn. The impact is a little bit low if you were prepared for it. It just brings them up to 7k. Depending on what deck you're playing, that might matter, it might not. Like, if you're playing green with like Odin, you could always just double swing at him full face. It doesn't super matter. But then if you're playing a more like tempo game like blue, or like you're in the mirror, this character could just like royally screw you over, right? And just really mess up your oncoming turns. But just always be mindful of it, be aware of how much Dawn the Zoro player is at, and then kind of make your turns make your turn before this play is possible, kind of playing around this card, because you don't want to reactively play against a 9 cost Whitebeard. I see a lot of new players, because, it's still a new card, right? We haven't had a lot of experience working with these cards. So it could catch you off guard most of the time. So just be very mindful that this is a possibility for them. So this is the portion of the video where I'm kind of going to give you guys a little bit of insight to what I think are the most important cards for each matchup, starting with green, because green is just like, I feel like a natural counter to red. So of course, you have your resters. Like, that is the main thing, honestly, is you have these resters to deal with your opponent's board before they can make anything out of it. So you have the Cat Vipers for plays like against the Nico Robin. You have Okiku, which is an amazingly oppressive turn 1 play. Like, if you're going against Zoro players, you should always be going second as the Kinemon player, so that you could play this Okiku turn 1 and just, they can't do anything to it. Like, there's literally no play they can do to get rid of this Okiku. So it's just going to stay on the board, and they have to get punished for anything they play, because they're going to be on 3 Dawn. They can't Vista it, and like they can't like do like a Seaquake play because they're playing Zoro, and also they can't Jet Pistol because they're not at 4 Dawn yet. So Okiku is such an oppressive play for them. And then of course, like, if you're not going second and you're going first, you could always play the Yamato on 3 Dawn as well. So Yamato is a new card. On play, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less. She is amazing for this matchup because you could play her for 3 Dawn on turn 2, rest one of your opponent's characters and get rid of it with your leader, and then now all of a sudden you have this 6k on the board that, you know, the red players hate swinging into your characters, and what they hate even more is swinging into characters that are like above 5k, because, you know, getting up to 6k is really annoying for them to deal with. Every Dawn matters to them, so Yamato is just an amazing card for these plays. I would hard mulligan for these resters, especially the Okiku and the Yamato in the early game, because it's just going to give you so much tempo, and if these things are on the board, like, your opponent is going to get so annoyed, and then you could just drop your late game bombs like Odin, like your 7-drop Kid, and by the time like they've gotten rid of these cards, they might just not have the cards to answer like your late game bombs. So black probably has the worst matchup into Zoro, but you do have cards that kind of make it a little bit annoying for the Zoro player to deal with you, that could kind of swing the game in your favor, starting off with these like cards that can't be KO'd by card effects. So the 3-cost Smoker is just a 3-cost 4k, but when attacking, if there's a character with 0 cost in play, this character gains plus 2000 power during this battle. And this is super, super important because it's very easy to get a character to 0 cost power, or sorry, 0 cost, because the Smoker leader skill is going to give minus power to something, and they always have 1 cost on the board. So this is basically a 3-drop 6k that can't be KO'd by card effects, which is really good because that means the Zoro player has to swing into it, and it can't be removed in any other way. And if these things are eating a swing from the Zoro player, this is a really good thing, especially if the Smoker can manage to like get something off board. You can imagine that Smoker gets something off board and then he gets swung into. That's kind of dealing with like 2 threats in one swing, kind of giving it blocker-ish kind of. But of course, one of the most important cards, if not the most important, is going to be your Borsalinos. Zoro players love to swing 5k at people's life because it's just like the minimum that they can hit you for, and it's getting a card out of your hand. Borsalino says, no, you can't do that because he turns into a 4-drop 6k on your opponent's turn, and then also he has the added effect of not being able to be KO'd by card effects. Keep in mind, he could still die to Jet Pistol Trigger because he can't be KO'd only on your opponent's turn. So that's something to be very mindful of, especially if you're in the later stages of the game and you need your Borsalino to live. It might be worth it to put 2 Dawn before you attack into it, just for those Jet Pistol Triggers. But yeah, they can't regularly Jet Pistol Trigger this. They can't remove it in any way. It's a blocker that they have to straight up deal with their attacks. And that could be super annoying, especially if they want to swing like 5k into you and then you block it with a Borsalino 6k. Now they have to think about, you know, do I get rid of this Borsalino who's at 1000 more than the leader and allocate more Dawn, or do I just try to like swing my opponent's face? And most of those times, like, those decisions will like lose the Zoro player the game sometimes because they just add up and they like keep messing up or keep making the wrong decision. And if Borsalino is like blocking like 2 or 3 characters during a turn, he's doing a really, really good job being the blocker, you know. And then of course there's 5-cost Smoker, a little bit of a slower card, but he does gain double attack if something is 0 on the field, which can be useful for, you know, kind of ending the game and catching up. You're going to be behind in life a lot of the time playing black. And then also he can't be KO'd by card effects, and he's at 7k, which is super annoying for Zoro players to deal with because they have to swing into this 7k, which they are not going to want to do because, again, they want to swing 5k at your face. So they either have to ignore this card or they have to allocate resources to trying to kill it and swing into it, which they might not want to do, right? But with that being said, I think Borsalino is something that you definitely hard mulligan for, especially if you're going second. You could play him on turn 2 and then kind of have this blocker up that's really annoying for your opponent to deal with the oncoming turns. I also wanted to talk about, you know, all of the removal that black has access to. I'm kind of spending a little bit more time on black because it is red's like best matchup, but you have cards like Impact Wave or Shockwave in the US, a 2-cost counter event. It's going to bump you up to 9k, give you plus 4000 power, and then it's going to KO up to one of your opponent's active characters with a cost of 3 or less. So remember, this is active characters, so the character has to be on the board and not attacked, not rested in any way. So, but this is very useful to you, right? Because usually this is a really easy effect to play around, but for red players, it's borderline impossible not to play into Impact Wave in some capacity, because they're going to have a lot of things on board for you to pop. So it's effectively stopping 2 attacks, which is really great. You could also save it for late game for those really big swings. And it also has like a really good trigger effect where you get to KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So this could deal with, Nico Robins straight up. It could deal with like Zoros straight up. The KO effect from the trigger, they don't have to be active or rested. It's just KO a card that costs 4 or less. A little bit more of a risky play, but something that might be worth it is playing Monkey D. Garp on turn 1. So Garp is a 2-cost 3k with 2k counter. When he has 2 Dawn under him, when attacking, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 0. And that might not seem all that great, but honestly, it's a pretty good effect to deal with Red's aggression sometimes, because they're going to ideally play something on turn 1. The turn swings back over to you. You play Garp, and if they don't have like a Vista to deal with it, or like a Nico Robin or something, this card could be really annoying for them to deal with, because now they're going to be hesitant to play something like a Sunny or like even like a Dodon and stuff like that, because you can just reduce its cost, like especially for the Sunny Coons, right? Like since it's 1 cost, you on your crackback you'll have 4 Dawn open. You can attach 1 Dawn onto your leader, subtract a 1-cost character to 0, and then swing 5k with Monkey D. Garb, which is, they have to counter out or they take a life, and then also they're losing whatever 1 cost they played. So it's kind of stopping them in a way. They might not even play the 1 cost, especially if it's Sunny, into this Monkey D. Garb, so they have to have like the Vista play. I have also seen this be kind of useful against people that like to play the Nico Robin on turn 2, because then they'll play the Nico Robin, and then you'll have like a card like Helmeppo that can give something like -3 cost, or like Suru that gives something -2 cost, that you could then counter with your Monkey D. Garb to make it 0 cost, and then they've effectively lost a Robin or lost a turn, which is really great. And then also you have Kobe. Kobe is a little bit different. I don't think he's super worth it if you're not popping a card that's like Nico Robin, because you have to discard a card in hand. And against Zoro players, like, cards are pretty much everything, because there are what's going to keep you alive with your like 1Ks and 2Ks. So Kobe is a little bit more committal than you want to go. And I think a lot of the mistakes with black players nowadays is just like playing the Kobe on something like a Sunny-kun probably isn't all that worth it, because you're losing a ton of card advantage, where like instead of playing a Kobe and then discarding something, you could have just like countered out instead and then dealt with it with like a character or your leader swing. And that's what's going to lose you the game in the end, is if you are playing black and you're discarding cards for these effects, and you end up with like 3 or 4 cards in hand, and you're just getting swung out by the Zoro player like twice or 3 turns at a time. So I would honestly just save this for like the Nico Robins and the Zoros, especially Zoros. Like, I feel like I've gotten a lot of cards out of someone's hand with Zoro and then just like popped it for a Kobe, and that puts them back by like quite a lot of card advantage. So plays like that is where Kobe will shine, but I would just keep him in hand most of the time. Like, you don't want to pop something that's like 1 cost or 2 cost. Moving on to purple, this kind of goes in the same category as black, like where you want to focus on grabbing your removal cards. So 7-drop King since OP1 has just been amazing for getting rid of like a lot of red threats. You're just gonna go Dawn -2 on play, KO a 3 cost and a 2 cost, and then especially for Zoro players now, like they're gonna have a lot of low cost cards for you to pop. And with OP2 coming around, like we have access to Shiryu, who's a 4 cost 5k, and then on play you just go Dawn -1, and he's gonna KO up to one of your opponent's cards with a cost of 1 or less, which is super useful for getting rid of like unrested Sunny-kuns, even like Makinos and stuff. Again, like Zoro players have a ton of 1 cost support, so they're gonna always have a 1 cost on board for you to pop with Shiryu. And then similar to Shockwave in black, we have Hell's Judgment for purple. It is a 2 cost counter event where you go Dawn -1, and then you're gonna give 2 characters or the leader -3000 power during this turn. This is super useful in stopping 2 attacks. I've even used it in situations where I won't necessarily counter out of the first attack that they're going for, I'll counter out of 2 future attacks and then counter 1k. So then, like, let's say they swing 5k at you. I would use Hell's Judgment on 2 things that have not swung yet, and then I'll counter out of that with a 1k instead. So you've effectively stopped like 3 attacks for 2 cards, which is amazing. The trigger effect isn't super relevant. It's just if your opponent has 5 or more Dawn cards, your opponent returns 1 from their deck, which, you know, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to use. I would much rather just use Hell's Judgment, because this changes like a lot of the math that we're used to in OP1. It's one of those cards that is like really catches you off guard, because it's basically like a double guard point, and it's just really going to help you kind of stave off that aggression. Even in the late game, it's just super useful, since your opponent is just going to go like really wide with their swings. And these are both things that, you know, you could search off of Hannibal, which are also super useful. You know, Hannibal is just a 1-cost searcher that looks at the top 5 cards of your deck, and you just grab an Impel Down type card. So you could grab Shiryu, Hell's Judgment, and then also like Domino, the blocker, and everything. So it's a very, very good combo to have in purple decks. And of course, we're going to go into blue. This is specifically for Ivankov, because this is kind of the only blue deck that has been reaching top 16s, right? We don't see a lot of Dofi. But what you're really going to want to focus on is your 4-cost blockers. You know, your Galdino is going to be awesome, since he's going to be able to attack into things on board and then be a blocker that the red player has to deal with on their turn. So he kind of gets like double value for that. Inazuma is also really annoying for red players to deal with if you could get down to 1 card, because he's a 4-drop 7k, which means he's all of a sudden outside of Jet Pistol range, so they have to combo another card with Jet Pistol, or they just have to straight up swing 7k, which again, they hate doing. But, you know, honestly, other than these 2 cards and like Luffy and Ivankov, you actually don't have a lot of like removal type cards for red players, because most of the cards that they use are either like 1-cost like Sunnykun, or they have effects that like they have on play effects or effects that they can use like Makino. So you actually don't want to bounce them back, since, you know, blue removal is all just like bouncing back to the hand, spinning to the bottom of the deck. But in the Ivankov list, like, you don't have a lot of access to that other than like Arabesque Fist, which is pretty much exclusively going to be used for the Robin. But you also have Monkey D. Luffy, and he's very important because he just lets you catch up in terms of the life gain, right? Because on play, if you trash up to 2 cards, he's going to bounce a 4 cost or lower, and then he's going to gain double attack. So he gets this effect on play and when attacking. So he's going to be very important for kind of, you know, either playing him, you know, just as a 6-drop or playing him off of Ivankov. He's going to be super important for getting those double attacks in and catching up on that life, because most of the time, like, you are still going to be behind in life against the Zoro player. You're pretty much just racing them down to 0 life, because you have no real way of dealing with their board except for swinging at it. There's no removal cards that are going to help you. So the only way that you can kind of deal with the red Zoro cards is if they swing at you. So you're going to be like countering out a lot, cycling through your cards with that Ivankov leader skill, and just hoping that you can establish a board that deals with the Zoro player's board. And then, of course, if you're playing red, this is a mirror match, and mirror matches are usually all about board control. So you want to get out those Robins really early, and you want to make sure you're vistaing things that make sense. So I've seen a lot of people like that I've played against where I will like Vista something like their Sunnykun, and then they'll Vista my Vista, which is like not the best thing to do, honestly. There are a whole bunch of other cards that you want to save the Vista for, like a Sunnykun, a Robin, even a Gordon. Like, so don't waste your Vistas in the mirror match. Especially, you want to get high priority value, because this is one of the only decks that you're going to play against where you know Vista is going to get its maximum value and KO something really, really good. And then, of course, because this game is all about board control in like a mirror match, you want to try and establish a Nico Robin first, because it's just going to be such an oppressive card I would even protect it because it's just going to prevent your opponent from playing anything. And if they do play something, they're going to lose a lot of value on board trying to deal with the Sneeko Robin. Also, just try not to rest your characters first. Try to create that big board for your opponent to deal with. Swing with leader, like if you don't have anything to swing with. And try not to be super aggressive, because I know for Zoro players, like, it is difficult to kind of take a step back and like not swing, because for most of your matchups, like, you're racing them down to 0 life before you run out of steam. But for the Zoro matchup and the mirror match, pretty much it's a lot different, because you going aggro into them is just giving them more cards, where you really want to just like establish board control and establish hand control instead. So not resting your character cards can be super, super important in the matchup. You don't want to turn your cards sideways first. And then of course, something that's kind of out of your control, but getting Whitebeards late is really important. I was watching some like Asia championships, and the Zoro players in the mirror that grabbed the Whitebeards were usually the ones that were winning the game. I think I watched one where it was like a Zoro mirror match, and he was like behind, but then what ended up happening is like he just played 3 Whitebeard in a row, and of course that just wins you the game, right? Because there's no way that anyone is dealing with the Whitebeard card. Like, you could Gordon Otama pistol it, but then like if you have multiple, it's just the game is done. So it might be worth it to kind of hold the Whitebeards in hand depending on what else is in it, but just save those Whitebeards for like the late game and play them in succession, and you'll just like kind of win the game outright. So that's going to be the end of this video today, guys. Let me know how you feel about this, and make sure to put, like, if I missed anything that you find that is like very useful in your Zoro matchups, put them in the comment section down below. Like, make a thread for this to just be like useful for everyone. And I'm going to be kind of making these videos very slowly for Beat the Meta, because they take a lot more time, you can imagine, to make than my other videos. So, but with that being said, thank you all for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope you guys are doing great in like whatever schoolwork or work you're doing in your careers. And I'll see you on the next one. Good luck on regionals, everyone.